This is Phantom Electric Ghost doing it live on the air with Joe Hilliard. You're an author and we're a writer. You're the author of the Warminster series. Is that the right way to say it?
It is. It's exactly the right way to say it. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to come on the show.
So we're going to talk about your current and future books, and we give your background, tell your story. Before we get into that, let everybody know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly Network. And if everyone wants to check that out, they can use that coupon code of Ghost to check that out for free for 30 days. We'll be on Newsly later tonight with an audio only version of the podcast. We have your www.jvhilliard.com link up. That will be fully clickable for everybody to go there and they can check out your books. That will be fully clickable, but you could type in that now if you want to check it out. And before we get into your story and your books, we always ask people a couple of questions that come on the podcast. What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, for me, I've always wanted to be an author. It was a lifelong dream. It was one of those things that I wanted to do since I was probably in the fourth grade. But it took COVID to give me the time to actually do it. I had prior to that, I was a defense lobbyist doing work in DC for defense and technology companies for about 20 years. And then when COVID happened, DC shut down. And it gave me the opportunity, what I thought was going to be kicking something off my bucket list, really, which was, finishing or writing a book, a standalone novel that just happened to be fantasy adventure. And then as the journey continued, the book caught fire, became an Amazon bestseller. I'm now up to book four, which will be launched later this month. And so for me, I've migrated, I've gone from the career being the lobbyist to now hopefully turning sooner rather than later into being, Joe the author. And it's always been, a lifelong dream of mine. So I'm glad that I got here and I really enjoy doing it. It's a little different than the right brain, left brain thing that I'm used to doing, day to day. And I think this is something I've been wanting to do for 20 years. And so I'm glad to finally start being able to do it.
That's interesting because we talk to a lot of creative people on the podcast. It's kind of been our focus as creators. And, a lot of times people find that moment in their life where it's like, you know what, I've always wanted to do this. And maybe now they give themselves permission or the moment gives themselves permission to actually do it. COVID was that moment for a lot of people. So it's interesting, we've been telling those stories for a while since 2016. We've been telling stories, but in 2020, it just expanded. We ended up, talking to a lot of people coming from that place. So that's a cool place to be as a creator. I'm a musician myself. It's always been my dream to do that full time. That's not necessarily what I do full time. So I understand like the dream of every creative person is to be able to do what you love, like more the day than just your dream thing.
Yeah, I 100%, and I'm working on that, right? It takes some time. You don't make a lot of money as a first-time author or a second-time author or even a third-time author, right? And so, this will be the completion of my first series, and then I've got a couple of standalone novels about the more popular characters in the series coming out throughout the remainder of this year and in 2025, and then series two will launch in 2026, accompanied with hopefully by then the video game and graphic novel adaptation. So, it's taken on a life of its own, but it's not there yet. It's still nascent. So it's still in that nurturing phase where things have got to happen. So, come back on in 2026. And that I'm hoping at that point that'll be the fun thing, and then this will be the day job as opposed to
Yeah,
the
sync
travel and the
licensing
and the
is
long
always
days in DC.
well, the sync licensing is always the big thing. That's as a musician, that's where we make our big bang for the buck. If we can get our music into a video game, if we can get it into advertising, if we can get it licensed to be used, on Twitch, which I did.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's like once you can get some sync licensing deals, it's like you don't necessarily have to be on the top like playlist anywhere. You can actually do pretty good. So that's
Yep.
interesting, like the video game and the graphic novel. Being a comic book fan, I'm kind of gonna jump into the graphic novel. Who are you gonna work with on that?
So we're talking to a company called Glass House out of Florida to do it,
Mhm.
and my illustrator right now, who's the one who's putting together what I would describe as sort of like the original deck is a guy named Joe Archie out of San Francisco who started by reaching out to me. He was doing some of his own. I don't want to call it fan art, but there's no other way of putting it. He was doing work for us that was designing. Like he would send me what he thought a sword would look like or armor would look like, and I was like, man, this is really good. Like, how'd you get involved? He's like, well, I would love to do your art in a comic book adaptation of it. And so I got introduced to him, and then also introduced subsequently by someone else to Glass House in Florida, and they do a lot of stuff that's anime related, which I think fits really well into my genre. So it looks like if things go smoothly, Glass House will be the lead, and Joe will be part of the illustration team.
Oh, two Joes.
Yeah, two Joes. Yeah,
But yeah, but so yeah, but when you got into this concept for your series, were you inspired by other people? Did you have this as like a it's your original idea, but who were you inspired by as like an author reader?
yeah. So I'll give you two separate answers for that. The first is I've always been an avid reader, and I fell in love with the fantasy adventure genre as a child. I had been read Tolkien's Hobbit when I was in the fourth grade, and my uncle, who was a big influence on me, and I can talk about him in a second too. He it got me my first Dungeons and Dragons set when I was 10, and as a result, we
Mhm.
started playing, and I started writing, and just really kind of fell in love with it. But my uncle was a Marine, and he was paralyzed in the war, and when he came home, he was very limited in what he could do as a quadriplegic. So one of the things he could do was play Dungeons and Dragons. It was a nice escapism for him, and for me, he was like a
Oh,
second father. And so I fell in love with
you
the
can bond
you know
with
with
them that
the
way.
with the game and everything. But he also was able to write. So one of the things he did was publish Pulp Fiction, and it was mostly horror stories or short stories. They would get into magazines and such and stuff like that. So I wanted to emulate that. I wanted to be that, but it's hard to do that,
Mm.
especially when you're right out of college, and I wasn't writing, even though I took a number of classes. You're getting married, want to have a family, you have to have a house, and writing isn't the way
Yeah, you
to
gotta have a
start a
good day
career,
job.
right? Yeah. Yeah. So like it kind of got in the way. But for me, that was part one. The other part, so I fell in love with Tolkien and R.A. Salvatore and Margaret Weiss from Dragonlance and Brandon Sanderson and the George Martins of the
Sort of
world that
fantasy, sort of
yeah,
fantasy area.
Shannara, yeah, like all that kind of stuff. And I just fell in love with it, and I started coming up with ideas for my realm. Because you can't borrow Middle Earth and you can't borrow Westeros. You have to go and
Yeah,
create your own
you gotta
realm,
come
and
up
I was
but
able
you're
to do that.
inspired by it.
That's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was also inspired by my group of D&D nerds. I still play Sunday night 6 to
Mhm.
10 with a group that we've been playing since high school. And we get on Skype every Sunday or every other Sunday nowadays with family and other obligations and things like that. We play for 4 hours, and a lot of the characters and a lot of the story arcs and a lot of the plot lines came from 20 years of gameplay. So you have this love of the genre coupled with all of these good stories that we developed, and I smashed them together to create what is now the realm of Warminster.
That's really cool because a lot of times, like, what I find with creative people is they take, like, their passion, why they love something, and then they put their own spin on it. I remember I'm a comic book fan, and I used to go to the comic shops. There's one called Rebel Peddler in in Springfield, Massachusetts, and there were kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, and they were playing all these card-based games in the comic shop. That was kind of the other business that the comic shop had, was they'd have these tables, and all these kids would they would give them a space to do that. Well, all us comic book kids were grabbing all the X-Men and Fantastic Four and all the other things, but
Right.
it was just cool. We're all kind of in the same mindset. Like they were buying the cards and everything that would be related to the card type of games, and we're buying the comics, but we're all into the same kind of concept of these fantasy characters. So it's just I always thought that was a good place to be as a kid. I was kind of more driven, into the Leonard Nimoy Star Trek lead, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Ditko, that type of. Yeah, I was really drawn into the Marvel universe, like back when it was like a written universe, not a film universe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's I grew up on the same stuff. You know what I mean? I was on the tail end of DC and Marvel prior to the movies. But for me, I like Harmony Gold, the Robotech generation, all the X-Men stuff
Oh yeah,
was
Robotech.
super cool for me. And then of course, as we grew up and comics had to take on an adult form, those graphic novels like Walking Dead and stuff like that really were able they grabbed my attention too because they were made for people that loved comics but were just a little older and needed more than maybe they would find in some of those older comics. And so there's these dark comics where bad things would happen, the good guys wouldn't always win. And
Hmm.
that really spoke to true life and the maturation of the industry with its target audience. And so guys like you and I can get pulled through to present day, so we're not reading the same thing that was acceptable to us when we were maybe 10 or 12, that now we want to see later in life that it's still in the same genre, the same art form, but
Yeah,
allows us
just
to
to
be
go deeper.
adults about it, right? And I think
Yeah,
that's
like
what's cool about with the way they've gone with it.
David Lapham, Straight Bullets. I got brought into like his real kind of hardcore, noir indie type of thing. He did the same thing with Miller's Sin City, Frank Miller's Sin
Yeah, like
City,
Frank
and
Miller. Yeah,
being
yeah.
brought
Sin
into like
City is fantastic.
Mouse, yeah, a lot of image, but the whole idea of like the graphic novel becoming more of an adult thing. We had these really writers that were taking a more mature point of view to the comics. They like not just thinking, oh, it's all for the kids for the Comics Code Authority. No, you can actually do adult themes, kind of like what EC Comics were. What did have adult themes until they got banned, but
Yeah, yeah.
so early comics in the 40s and 30s didn't really think, their primary fans were like soldiers coming back from World War II. They weren't always just the kids. And somehow everybody, in the 50s and 60s is, oh, it's just for the kids. But yeah, it's interesting. We can diverge on that. But this building your world, I know you've been influenced by the fantasy realm, but like, so you had your own spin because you were in it as a fan. So you start to want to see things that you didn't see? Was that your
Well,
strategy?
yeah,
Like, okay,
absolutely.
I know, I see what Tolkien does, and I see what these other people do, but I have a different spin. I think I can do something because I'm a reader, and maybe I'd like to see this, and I don't see that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, if you look at Tolkien, who's kind of the granddaddy of them all, right? I mean, Tolkien, to me, he had an epic fantasy story, which was this clash of good and evil on an epic level, and the good guys were going to win. And every now and then a good character would die, but it would be in the sacrifice of the greater good, right? Um, in my realms, I wanted it to be the opposite of that. I wanted it to be kind of the Game of Thrones model, which was, over the
Mhm.
last 10 or so years, where the good guys don't always win. And there's jeopardy for all the characters in the
Like Empire
novel.
Strikes
And,
Back all the
and some
time.
of your favorite characters may go away, right? Yeah. So, for me, but what I wanted to do was do something different, and you mentioned, Star Trek before and Leonard Nimoy, on Star Trek, their currency was a credit. On Star Wars, it's a credit. On all like Battlestar Galactica, everybody has credits. So for me, I created my own currency, right? I created my own
Mhm.
pantheon of gods. I created the politics of the world, which I took a lot of out of DC, both national and international politics with diplomacy and the way not just states work with one another, but countries work with one another
Oh,
as
actors,
part of that.
different
And so I
actors.
created a variety of
Yeah,
things that go a little deeper than just the story about a king. In my realm, there's a variety
political
of
actors, not just the king.
leadership, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that and that I think that was important, for me to do. And so the for lack of a better term, the capital of the realm is a place called Castleshire, where all of the baronies and the principalities of the world come together to almost in a democratic way, except run by the nobles of the world, to make laws for the realm writ large. right? And so I think those kind of things have been interesting plays for me to make it very relevant. And of course, the big thing about it is making monsters that people haven't seen yet, right? So
Yeah.
I do have some, and some of the races are, there are elves in my world, but they're my elves. So like the Vermilion or the Raven elves, or the Dale elves, they all are a little different, a little unique to my realm. But the other creatures that you find are my creatures and mine alone. Now, I've borrowed inspiration from Chinese myths and Nordic myths and Native
So
American myths and African
pull
myths.
like a little
But
Asgard here and there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you sprinkle that in a little bit, and that's cool. But you also leave room for the fact that it's not the same thing. You're not going to see Thor in
Yeah,
my novels, or you're not going to see someone worshiping a Greek god in my novels. It's literally going to be my own story with my own ancients. I don't even call them gods; they're called the ancients, and they've left the terrestrial realm to go to the hall of the ancients, which is the heavens, and things like that too. So it's I have a lot of fun with it when I do it, but I try to make it um everything
sure.
about it is unique, or at least is inspired by something, and you may find some comfort in the fact that that looks like what you think it is, but it's
Mhm.
unique to my realm, right? And I think that's the fun part of world building.
Yeah, it's always important. I was always like very drawn in by Kirby's kind of, new gods. And even within Marvel, he had this idea of creating like gods. Like almost all the
Hmm.
superheroes were kind of like gods anyway. And so when he created new gods, I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to create some new ones. But I'm actually, instead of calling them superheroes, they're going to be gods, really be gods. Like Asgard, that idea that he was doing with Thor, he totally took to DC and he turned into this whole nother realm of superheroes, which kind of I think some kids back at the time it came out, they didn't know how to digest it because they were looking for something like a Captain America or looking for something that was more familiar. And he was actually creating totally new ideas that didn't really have any other thing map to look at. So when you so I guess that it's kind of like a balance. So you want your reader to to understand what your character is, but you want it to be unique. So did you ever find
That's right.
like a struggle trying to well, I want to make it this character, but it has to have some identifiable attributes that my readers are going to get, right?
Yeah,
Is
and
that
I think any fantasy or sci-fi author runs into that, because your world, by their definition, doesn't exist. And so when you're creating a world, there's parts of it that you have to make believable, have to be realistic, so that people can identify with them. That's just hard. It's hard to have a world without gravity, or have a
Mhm.
world that, is the sky blue? Does it have three suns? Tell me about it. Like what, and you want to learn, you want to suspend disbelief, but there has to be some level of realism that's baked into it. And so these adaptations they often will call to something that you can recognize, and then say, "Ooh, I like this unique and creative spin that this author, this filmmaker, this poet has put on it, because of the fact that it's so unique, and you can kind of take inspiration from things that you've seen around, or you're making up something that's new to your world, right? Like, so I created the Keepers of the Forbidden, which is basically a sect of prophets that come together to learn how to hone their abilities, and then they're sent out into the world, in some cases back to their homelands, to advise kings and queens. And it was kind of like Martin's Maesters, right? Or
Mhm.
you can limit, in a big push, you could say it's sort of like Star Wars Jedi, in the sense that
Yeah,
they're not in tune with the Force. There's no force around
force.
them, but they see things through chicken bones and
There's a
mirrors
mysticism.
and sleep.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
yeah.
a mysticism around it that comes with that. But people can say, all right, I identify with that. I see that. There's no Ouija board here, but they're using something similar, so I can identify with it. And so, for me, I think that's been the fun part, is putting all those
Mhm.
pieces in the puzzle together. And and some people, I mean, fans, they surprise you. Your readership will surprise you. They'll come and tell you who they love, who they don't like. Sometimes you think they're going to like your main characters, and they don't. Other times, you're all of a sudden you find out that your most popular character is a minor character, and they want to see more of him or her. And so I've
Mhm.
had that too. So you'll see,
Yeah,
as the series gets a little longer in the tooth, I'll run into you'll see characters that I've been told by my readership are more important to them, so I write more about them. And so like, it's
Or
kind of fun.
yeah, it's that instant. It's like kind of feedback you can get now. Like you go to a book convention, you go to a, and then you see your fans and you interact, and you can get that feedback that can loop back into your work. It's interesting because maybe comic conventions would have that, and with the feedback would get back to Kirby or get back to Ditko, get back to Claremont, and he's like, oh, Wolverine, he's the guy everybody likes.
That's
So
exactly
they're like,
right.
he needs more. He needs, he needs more. He's not the,
Yep.
and he wasn't like the major thing. He wasn't supposed to be the major thing, and then suddenly becomes
Yeah.
more of a major thing because the fans like we like him. We think that he's the guy. So did your fans kind of pick your Wolverine?
Yes,
Do
they
you have
did.
an
I got
over?
one good and one bad, right? So like the good one I had was I have this, for lack of a better term, it's like a hobbit on steroids with a face tattoo. His name is Blue Connie, and he has a blue face mask like a raccoon, and he's of the Huldra, which is a name of his race, which is like half humans, except they're warriors, and in this case, berserker rage. And he rides a war dog, and he fights with these serrated daggers and stuff like that. But he's crazy. But people liked him because he was comic relief. He was a lot of fun. He would be the one to be drinking. He would be the one to do stupid stuff. He would be the one to say the most inappropriate things at the right times, and people gravitate to that kind of stuff because it's different. On the bad side, my assassin, this in Canis Drew Eighth, is by far my most popular character. People love him because they love to hate him, And in the beginning, I
Oh,
didn't
he's a bad guy.
design a whole heck of a lot about him. I just made him my Boba Fett, right? Which is one of my fans said that it was the greatest. She said, "Please don't kill him. He's your Boba Fett." And when I heard that, I was like, "What, really?" And then I realized that every episode that I was on of a podcast or a radio show where people had read the book and wanted to talk about it, or fans were calling in, that he would always come up. And it was like, what is he going to do next? And how did he become the way he is? And so my first standalone story is his origin story, because people hate
Oh,
him and
awesome.
they love to hate him because he's just the world's biggest jerk. But then you figure out, oh well, he wasn't always like this, and it's kind of like the Darth Vader redemption arc. Can he redeem
Yeah.
himself? And when people find out why he does what he does, they're like, oh, well, you know what? I can identify with that. He wasn't born
Yeah.
wicked. He wasn't born
Yeah,
evil.
sometimes you don't
He
find
this
that out till further along in the story. Like sometimes you show up
Right.
in like a very minor appearance, and it's kind of like the man with no name in the good, bad, and ugly. A few
Yep.
dollars more. It's like, you don't really. Clint Eastwood, when they did that movie, he took lines out. He had the director take a lot of his speaking lines out of that trilogy to make it more mysterious, where he really doesn't say that much,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
interesting.
And yeah, and the same thing here is he doesn't, but I found out how popular he was. So in book 3, you start to see some of the background and origin story. And then if you read the Black Rose, which is his nickname as an assassin, he leaves a black rose on all of his victims, so that everyone knows that he did it, kind of his ego signature. Um,
Mhm.
in the origin story, the Black Rose, which will come out around the holidays this year, that's exactly what this is about. It's literally his background story, and you find out who he was when he was young and what happened to him to get him to the
It
point where
really
he
is.
becomes this, vengeful assassin, and how it fits into the rest of the story. It's kind of fun.
Or the anti-hero, or they kind of, sometimes the villain, the anti-hero becomes like there's like a thing, you like having the person that's like, well, I'm not supposed to like him, but I like him.
Yeah, yeah, and well, this guy, I'm not sure the hero and him in any sense will be ever said in the same sentence, but you're right. It's like this is the guy that everybody tells me they love to hate. So I give him as much as I can.
That's so when you were building characters, like when you're world building, I know that a lot of writers, they take a lot of time to build that world before they even really build out the plots or build out the dialogue or anything. Did it take you like months or years to come up with like the world before you really dove into actually writing the stories?
Yeah, but I had a bit of a cheat code, right? Like I mentioned before, I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for a while, and one of my hobbies over the years has been to really memorialize the campaigns that we've played. And so as a dungeon master, someone who runs a game experience for other role players, I've always been the chief storyteller. I've not always played, I've always dungeon mastered. It always seems like I was to use a football term, sort of like a steady quarterback. I was the steady DM for many, many years. And so I've had rare instances when I was the player. So for me, I was always the one creating the story. I had the plot lines, the villains, the campaigns and things like that. And so I had all this material. And then it was just a matter of taking it all and kind of cobbling it together, weaving it together into what I would consider like a novel story where it's very linear and it's not determined in the same way when you're a dungeon master and your players aren't following your plot. Sometimes it can be frustrating, but you have to be a good enough storyteller to twist it, and keep going
Right.
and
Yeah.
making it, be creative because you don't know where they're going to go. In the book, I know exactly what's going to happen because I'm the one that's controlling everything,
Yeah.
including the
Everything.
dialogue, including the pace, including right. So, I took the stories that were battle tested, those that my player characters had the most fun with, the villains that they hated the most. And I even took inspiration and took some of the characters that they played and made them major and minor characters in the novel. So one
Yeah.
of the very few instances in which I was a player, Sir Ritter of Vulcaneer is my character, and he's one of the main characters in the book. I dropped him in. Damus Alaric, who is a keeper, was a minor character that I had you know 15 years ago back in college, part of the campaign, but it was something that never got fleshed out the way I thought it was, and I was able to take it and flesh it out in the books, and make these guys come together and be sort of like the party that goes off and solves the world problems. And so like there's a lot of that kind of fun, and you get to relive stuff in the way you intended it to be relived, but also you have years of experience where you can tell when there's a point when you're a dungeon master or any kind of storyteller when you look around the room and all eyes are on you and you feel that everyone's on the same page with you. It's those moments that I tried to capture and bake into the final novel because I knew
Okay.
at
Yeah.
that point that it had been battle tested. Like everyone in the room was like, "I'm with you. I like this, or I like to hate this. Like that evil guy, that villain, that's bad. Like I can't believe and we're gonna fight the good fight because it's frustrating, and we want to go out." So that's how I've sort of built it up over the years.
So your writing's down in terms of like plotting and do you find that you because you had all the stuff that you've been doing and it was kind of there in your back pocket, like it's there in your consciousness. So a lot of times, as I'm a musician, so like I've been playing like 25 years, there's stuff that's in like my subconscious. Some stuff like if I go play with my group, we might not have to say anything. We must go into something, and it's just I there's like grooves and thing and patterns I have, and I built over, and we just kind of weave them, and it just kind of stream of consciousness comes together. It seems like it's random, but it really isn't. It's because I had these things in my back pocket, and I kind of knew where to place them based on the moment. So it's like you're building those moments, you kind of know where to put them, right?
Yeah, and some of that comes from, there's a couple variety of sources that will tell you whether they like something or don't. In the author community, something called alpha or beta readers, and those are the
Big
folks that are
readers,
reading
yeah.
it before it really gets published, right? And they're telling you what they like and don't like. And I liken it to, having a test audience in a theater, and you show them three different endings to a movie, and the one that's the most popular ending, that's the one you
Yeah.
choose, right? So you learn that as you go. As an author, it's really a team sport. I mean, these folks are out there and they're getting free advanced reader copies. They get to be part of the creative process with you and dictate how your writing is going to end up, and how the plot is going to finalize and what's going to happen to these characters and things like that. So that's part of the process as well. So it's not just that, but then I've had these like you said, I am a plotter. Like I can't sit down and just start writing. I don't have that Stephen King gene in my body. I have to plan and know the direction in which I'm writing. And so, and maybe that is just becoming the form and function of me being a dungeon master for so long. Like you have to plan these big campaigns and you have to have room in there for going to the right or going to the left, depending on how the party decides that they're going to go as part of the gameplay. So for me, you have to build out these epic realms as part of that, and all I did was take the favorites and make a Frankenstein out of it, and it's called the Realm of Warminster.
That's awesome. It's like when you had a way to like you were able to synthesize something you loved as a gamer, and then figure out, like, oh, I can actually turn this into a piece of art. Which is like I think
Yeah,
that's the interesting thing. I talk to a lot of creative people, and it's always interesting to see how creative minds work and how they put together what they're doing. And so, I've never talked to an author that's come from like a Dungeons and Dragon or a gamer perspective, taking that experience and then weaving it into their structure. So that's very interesting, but it's not unexpected because it's like creative people find different ways to create what they create. And I just find it super interesting.
yep, no, it's absolutely true, and for me, everybody has a different process, right? There are some writers that I have friends that will start writing, they're halfway through the book, and I'm like, "How's it gonna end?" And they're like, "I don't know." Like for me, that would never happen. Like I start by writing the end, then I write the
Maybe no.
beginning, and then I fill in the middle, right? And I don't know how they can do that without knowing the direction that something's going. But that's their writing style, and more power to them for it. I couldn't do it, but that doesn't mean what they're doing is wrong. And same thing with me. Like if I gave them a structure, they would probably be bored with it or say, I don't know, like the character hasn't told me what they're going to do yet. Where for me, I know exactly what's going to happen because it's a good story if it goes the way I want it to go. So, I think those writing styles vary. And then there's the combination of the two, where some people do some light planning and then see where it goes, right? For me,
Yeah.
I'm heavy planning. I know how it's going to go. And that's the biggest part of my process where, I don't have a tendency to get writer's block because I've already planned everything. If I have
Mhm.
writer's block, it comes from the fact that I'm in the process of planning it and I need to find the best solution and the best way out of it, and things like that. But for me, I think that helps me stay on point. It helps me stay on timelines. My publisher's happy, my readers are happy because I'm hitting all those checkpoints of staying on schedule.
Yeah, that was always what I found interesting about like the comic book industry. You think about like when Kirby and Ditko, they were on this 30, monthly schedule, and they had to plot things out. But so they were able to hit their deadlines and still do stories that would go beyond their deadline. And so they had to plan things out to do these arcs to these like, and so like some of it is planned and some of it was like unplanned, and it was kind of like a balance of like what you could kind of come up with off the cuff and what you had as an overall plot line. And it's interesting, reading the history where some of these things came together, like how much of that was like kind of off the cuff. Oh, I need to get this in the next 6 hours. Boom, I just did it. And it
Yeah.
came out great. And it like and then other things were labored that you're like, oh, that must have been really uh, you know, that you didn't know it was labored. So it's like it's kind of like point, you don't know what takes what amount of time.
Yeah, and I think
You
that,
think,
using your comic books scenario, there are times where they'll do something in episode 30 that will reflect back in episode 200. So that planning is necessary. I say that I tease about my novels. I always say that there's no wasted real estate in them because if I put it in there, there's a reason that it's there. So you'll see clues that might be hidden in plain sight, but they're there for a reason. And I'm
yeah.
informing you about something that's going to be important later. It might not happen until book 4, but you're reading about it in book 1. And I'll remind you about that in book 2 and 3 on your way to book 4 too.
Yeah, film directors will sneak things in. Like there's like a moment you didn't really think it was that important, and then it actually shows it's like that's a really pivotal moment that you don't even almost ignore it, and then you're like, oh,
Yeah, it
you go
passes you
back. It's
by
like
like a ship in the night.
it
Yep.
is, yeah, it's like yeah, it was. They go like, wow, you actually planned that out. That there's actually, that level of connection to that moment ties into it in the third movie or like at some point, and you're like, wow, that's. It's just interesting when you build these worlds, that like how detailed they can be, or how intricate they can be, and how like what people actually have to go back and read your book or look at your work multiple times to actually find all the Easter eggs. Do you like throwing things in that are not like that have these like little puzzles that people have to uncover?
Yeah, that's fun, and I also think the Easter egg play, for especially for my friends that game with me, they like to see the names of their characters in them and see if I've stayed true to their character arcs or the plot arcs and stuff like that. Other times it's just, just dropping something in there that because I think writers typically, as humans, are observant people, right? They're just observing people, and so I'll see something in a coffee shop somewhere or a grocery store, and somebody's tick or the way someone answers a question or a quote that they've said,
Yeah, yeah, put
I'll
that
bake that
into
in there too, right? It's like, oh, that's a really good way it happens. And you see that in real life too, where it's just like people make decisions and you're like, why did they do that? And or you see something and you're like, oh, I really like the way that, and then how can I take that, shape it into something that I can use in my novels? And so, for me, Easter egg is one way of putting it. I also like to memorialize some of the gameplay that we've done, so that it's something that I can share with others because most gamers like to see that. I mean, we live in a day and age where there are streaming services, some of which are going to get this tonight, like Twitch, or Discord or whatever, where folks go on there and they game and they'll watch other people game, right? Well, this is different in the sense that it's not playing with the controller, it's playing in your mind and as a tabletop role playing game. But that's been popularized by Critical Role and others that are like that, where people will watch people playing role playing games and say, why don't they do this or why don't they do something different and stuff. And so that's that generational thing that wasn't
yeah.
available to me that's now available to many people that are reading my stuff. Where there's even a genre of books in our they called lit RPG, which is literature for role playing games, and most of it is targeted to Halo or other kind of very popular gaming systems and stuff like that. So you'll see stuff out there for Fortnite and whatever, and people will write about their experiences as that through the eyes of a character. Ours is just a little different. It's just Dungeons and Dragons or some other form of it for sci-fi
Mhm.
and dystopian fantasy.
What I always liked about sci-fi, again, like growing up, I'm a child of the '70s, but I always like watching Rod Serling in The Outer Limits, and I liked how they could take, like, do science fiction, and even Gene Roddenberry used to do that, like take social issues and throw them into the science fiction. Right. So take an issue like Spock was always being like, "Oh, you green-blooded alien." McCoy would be saying stuff to him. It's like so he's able to throw in that kind of concept of like, oh, you know, the interspecies, like, oh, humans are better than Vulcans, you know, or Vulcans are better than humans. So you can throw that and have that debate without it being what it is in the real world, but you can bring it into the world or the monsters on
Yeah,
Maple
and
Street.
I
You
think
can bring that
Roddenberry
there.
was a genius at that, man. Like he was able
You
to
just throw it
challenge
in there
all
all the
sorts of issues from like interracial kissing to sexual orientation to different things that he did there. And you also see, like you mentioned Rod Serling. I think I don't know if you've seen it, but the Netflix series called Black Mirror, which is sort of like the 2020 version
time. Oh
of
yeah,
the
yeah, Black
Twilight
Mirror.
Zone, right? It is so much fun to watch because they do the same stuff. They just challenge social norms of today, which are things like gaming and social media and all the advancements in technology. And now you're challenging that. Where I think in Roddenberry's day and in Serling's day, they were things about communism or nuclear war, and they lived
Yeah,
under a different, where
a
now
different
this is
world. Yeah,
like yeah, like the Black Mirror stuff. What made it, in my mind, so popular was because it was taking today's stuff and telling Gen Z and some millennials, "Hey, don't let this stuff control you because it's bad too." And they show you the extreme, and that's where I think Sterling and Roddenberry were able to get away with that by doing that. And I reflect on that in bits and pieces in my novels. There's some tropes and themes that you'll find as part of it that I think challenges social mores and stuff like that. But for the most part, I write so that people are entertained, and
mhm,
I don't like to get heavy into messaging, just because that often will throw people out, jar them out of the
yeah,
book, and they don't want to read about that. They're reading my stuff for escapism, so I'll
yeah,
provide them that level of entertainment as opposed to talking about everyday things. They're going to go to work tomorrow. They got kids, they got bills to pay. They're going to see this at their community groups, whatever, wherever they go to do that. they don't need more of that from me. They need escapism from
Yeah,
me, and
trying
that's
to
what I
get
try to
away.
offer to them. Yeah.
So, I guess one question I had, in terms of like if you could spend a day with one of your characters, like, which character would you want to spend all your time with?
Well, that's a good question, because I think typically people would think I would say Ritter because it was my character. I made him up, and I think that's why I wouldn't, because I don't need to. Like, I played him as my character, so I would put that aside. I think though, the one character that I would love to spend a day with is the villain, Grey Taurus the Mad, only because um, he's sort of like Darth Vader, right? In a sense where, he comes out of nowhere. People don't know his backstory. They discover what made him the villain that he is. Again, he wasn't born this way. He made some choices that we all could have made, and it took him down the wrong path. And he has this shot at redemption. And does he choose it or does he not choose it? And I think that for me, he's a complicated character, and most of the readers see him through the eyes of the villain, right? But I like to write my novels where they're in multi point of view, which is kind of standard for my epic fantasy, dark fantasy stuff. It's not a single point of view novel, but I write through his eyes sometimes so that you can
Mhm.
see why he's making the decisions that he is, which I think. For me is a lot of fun, and it gives the readers a peek behind the curtain to the big bad evil guy, the big boss, at the end of the game, and that way they can see that this just isn't some bad actor that was born evil. He's just Lucifer, right? That's not what happened. This is a guy just like us that stumbled, and his
Yeah.
predicament. You could have chosen that same path that he did. You could see yourself doing it, so you want to see if he makes his way out of it, or if he continues down if there's no shot at redemption. And I think that that's a very fun tropey kind of arc to have in fantasy adventure and sci-fi, for that matter, is do they come back to the light, or do they stay in darkness? And in Grey Taurus's case, I don't want to play a spoiler alert here, but Grey
Yeah.
Taurus's case is something that you rarely see, and I think people will like him. So if I had to spend a day with him, I would want to shadow him just to see, what he's thinking and what he does. And there's even slip ups, like he slips back into his old self at times, and the way he treats people, because I don't want anybody thinking that he's just going to throw you in a dungeon and throw away the key. There's a human side, there's a human element to him that I want people to see, that I think that allows them to appreciate him more for the decisions that he's making, because it's more realistic.
Yeah, like, I don't know, there's a character, Kirby created, Doctor Doom. And I always thought
Yeah.
that he was really interesting because sometimes he'd be the badass villain's gonna be like Galactus, destroy everybody. And other times he would actually, in Latvia, his kingdom, and there would be a little kid, and he wouldn't have them cowering in fear. He'd actually be treating them like a dad or like a grandpa. And they was that he could actually be kind. He's this evil, evil, powerful guy, but he could, in some cases, be kind. And in some cases, like his backstory, he's wearing this mask because he thinks he's like horribly like injured with a scar. And then there have been some visions of that where his scar isn't even there. It's like a psychological scar that he thinks is there. He's wearing a mask and he doesn't even really need to wear it. So that makes him like more
Yeah,
complicated. Like, you make your character have that much depth, then you look at him, you feel sorry for him and not just hate him. You can start to
yeah, and
wonder.
and I try to do the same thing with Great Taurus. I mean, Great Taurus, there's a scene in the second novel where he's abducted the main character's love interest. And, when she's brought to him, she's been beaten and mistreated, and he basically lets her roam around free. And he scolds his guards for mistreating her, because she's a healer, and she prays to this goddess of healing, and she would never be a threat to them. And he's like, why are you treating her that way? And that would have been the old Grey Taurus before the
Mhm.
new Grey Taurus. And so it shows what I think is a real human element, to him, and you're like, why is this guy being nice? Is it a trick? And it isn't. But then when you learn the backstory and you see why he abducted her in the first place, you know, he's using her to find this way back, and
He
she
wants
can't
to
provide
be.
it to him, and then he loses it because he thinks that this is the way. And so you get this big swing, the Doctor Doom swing, like you said, that's sometimes can be super kind and has these psychological scars. Great Taurus has very same thing. Now he has both physical and psychological scars, but then other times he just is so diabolical that you just love him as a villain. At least I do.
Yeah, it's just cool when you build like the multi-layered, you know, facets of your characters. You know, when I'm a musician, we build like layered songs, and we have things called shadow layers that might be a little bit of a hint of a note and then change the key. And then when it all comes together, the layers actually represent a bigger picture, and we call it kind of like a sound painting. So when you're
Oh, that's
drafting,
cool.
you can draft something, and once it comes fully together, because of music theory, it becomes something more than what the parts are when you hear them all together.
Mhm.
And it's something you have to like plan out. And so it sounds like the kind of planning you're doing in your stories to kind of get that world building and the outcome you want.
Yeah, you know, it's funny you mentioned that because I like the way you described it. It's layered, right? I once went to a show. It was a kind of a play. It was around Halloween, and it was a local group called Squonk Opera, and it was about zombies and vampires and things like that. And they had this one scene where they started out where a zombie was just dragging one foot, and it would make a thump, a thump, a thump. It was rhythmic, and then a zombie would come out and scream, and then something else would happen. A zombie was dragging something that would make a different sound, and by the time they all got on stage, it came together in this opera where the scream was a song, and the thump was the percussion, and the you know and everything, and all of a sudden you're like, holy cow, you didn't expect it coming, but they basically dissected it, and all you were hearing was just little different elements, and then when they went and put them all together, it became a performance. And I like the way you described that, and I think a good author needs to do that with their work too. So you see all these divergent character arcs, and you're like, oh my goodness, how is Adder and Ritalin, how are they going to, or Ritter and Adeline, how are they going to get together and fall in love? They have this forbidden love, and we're waiting for that to happen on one arc. And then Damus and Great Taurus are like the chosen one versus the false prophet in another arc, and then all of a sudden, bam, they come together, and you're like, oh, I get this now. And I think it's that
It's the full picture.
orchestral kind of nature of what we do, especially in epic fantasy, that makes it fun to read.
Yeah. And sometimes in music, we have like the crescendo and the decrescendo. So you build up, you build up the volume, and then you kind of can bring down the volume, and you can bring the rhythm could start slow, and then it could speed up and then get very like powerful and dynamic. So you use like loudness, and you use like rhythmic, repetitive nature of things, and then bring the beats closer together or further apart. And so like when you're building your plot lines, like you're doing similar things. I always try to find the synergy between music and other forms of art. And I always try to, relate. It's like, oh, there's some concepts in music that are similar to what you're doing as an author.
Well, I think yeah, you just hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, you see that, like you mentioned, like I think Orf's Carmina Burana, like in the beginning, it's so soft, and all of a sudden, bam, it punches you in the face, and you're like, where did that come from? Or like wholesome the planets with Mars, and you hear this stuff coming in, and bam, from like the classical music side, and then you also see it, with James Brown. It starts out boom, 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 and then boom,
Mhm.
punches you in the face. It's the same stuff. It's just it's a different era, and I think as authors we
Yeah.
need to do some of that too. And there are a variety of plot lines that you can choose to follow. There's like the standard hero's journey that Luke Skywalker goes through, where it's like you see that and
Mhm.
varying parts of him, or what's been popularized recently is sort of like the W plot, which is where the characters on the top of the W start out great, and then there's a problem, and they drop down, and then they partially solve it, and then there's another conflict, and then they finally solve it, and by the time you're done, you plot it out, it looks like a W. And I think AI devices and others,
Yeah.
like teach towards that rhythm because we're
We're using
used to
that.
it. Like there's almost like a body rhythm reading that stuff. So there's plenty of that too. That it doesn't look like it when you're reading the book, but there's an academic exercise that goes into some people's plot lines. Part of it. I don't think mine fit that well. Mine would more look like a Z, kind of like a like a heart monitor or something like that. But I think that's the truth of it all is when you're dealing with epic fantasy, you're going to
Mhm.
have a bunch of up and downs and a smashing together, a collision
Yeah.
of plot lines and character arcs as things go. So
What do you think about like tools like ChatGPT and AI and Gemini in terms of being an author? Like, how much would you utilize them in your workflow? Are you interested in it? Or are you, I've talked to some authors and they're like, no. I've talked to authors and say I can use it as a tool. So I've seen people kind of go all over the spectrum. Where are you, on that?
so I'm primarily opposed to it, but there is functionality to it, right? And when I say that, like in your day job, in my day job, using it to put together copy for social media posts, there's nothing wrong with that. Or, hey, I need a description of something, or somebody's bio, go and find that stuff. That's fine. Where it crosses the line is when it scrapes from other people's
Other
stories
people's
and
work.
it's
Yeah.
basically stealing my work and then
Yeah.
presenting it in a different form. And it doesn't know that it's doing that, right?
Yeah.
And
The
then if you
learning
ask it to
library.
write the same thing in a different way, it would bring you an entirely different story, right? So, I think that there are some copyright infringements and trademark infringements that may come from that. I've even seen it with art, where it's like you say create a purple mermaid, and it goes out there and pulls
Yeah.
these things
Yeah.
together, and it's someone else's work. And now they've got AI devices that can track the use of
Yeah.
AI. And you don't want to be the author that did that, right? And I think that we've seen it in academic settings. We've seen it in in settings where it's just it really makes it difficult. And AI is as complex as it is, doesn't originally think anything. So the stories that come from you
No,
and or the songs that come
it's
from
all in
you
the
or the art
library.
that
It's
you
at the
create
large
are
learning library.
original, right? Yeah, so I think it's hard to use
Yeah. I mean,
AI
that's the
to
problem.
anything except for maybe editing,
Yeah.
right? Or to fact check something. Outside of that, it's really hard to use it
Yeah.
in a creative model without saying, you know what, I don't care. I'm just stealing someone else's work, hoping we could put something together to make it work. And that to me is a no-no, and it's plagiarism in some form, whether it's not direct
Yeah.
plagiarism or not. It's just going to get you in trouble. So I try to stay away from it, but it is good for research. It is good for something quick that you need to put together for like a social media hit or response and something. Those things, I think it is that tool that you can use.
Yeah, I find it like, the sampling error before you got cleared licenses cleared. Because
Yep.
there's a point sometimes our tech gets ahead of the law, and that happened in the sampling days. That when the initial samplers came out, people just used them, and they never cleared the sample. Now that's a no-no. You can't use somebody else's work without getting a clearance of the sample. To me, AI needs the same kind of clearance because if it finds something, it should be really honest about what it found and what it sourced and give the footnotes and the end notes exactly where it got that from. And then it should give, and if you're going to use that, then you have to get it cleared and you have to footnote and you have to, acknowledge that that's not really yours.
Hmm.
You're using it like a sample and don't act like it's something new. That's where I have some issues with the AI companies that they act like it's new when it's not. And they
Yeah,
kind
and
of
everybody knows
disrespect
it.
artists. Yeah, and they've got to start to, I understand your machine can do that, and you want to get paid for your tokens, but you need to pay the artist before you pay for the token.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Just
That's my
pay the
opinion.
source
But
material, where to come from, just pay me for it.
yeah, if you want to pay me, and if I allow you to use it, because it could be like I know I don't want you using it because that's my secret sauce, so you can't use it. So I'm going to deny the use. You need to be able to give people the power over their own work and not say that suddenly copyright law doesn't matter because this tool can do it. Just because it can
Yeah,
do it
or a
doesn't mean it's
trademark or
right.
anything else. It's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Yeah, we get ahead of ourselves a lot of times, but I think it'll catch up. Lawyers like to get paid. But uh, but the last things I wanted to ask about in terms of a movie, what actors or actresses would play your core characters? Did you ever think about that?
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot. But in truth, you know, it's easier for me. Like, I see minor characters aligning with actors and actresses that could play them because I think they would play a character. So, like, one of the villains in my novels is a guy named Baron Dragish von Lormark, and I can see the guy that played Kurgan in the Highlander,
Mhm.
playing that character because he's tall, that fights with a two-handed sword, deep voice, just like menacing, right? And I can see that, or things like that. But it's hard for me to it's hard for me to do that. Now, if you ask my wife and her friends, I mean, every character in my novels are going to be portrayed by every hot guy in Hollywood. So, if you start naming them, even if it's a small character, that's who they're going to put in the role. So it's hard for me to do that. And frankly,
Yeah,
I what I've learned in doing both the game and now the graphic novel is to stay in my lane. Like
yeah.
I
Let the
find, like
other
I've learned that
artists
the
figure it out.
medium of yeah, like someone who's good at casting is going to find the right people for it.
Yeah, the
I'm
casting
not
people,
that
they
guy,
find
and
people who are unknown. A lot of times
yeah,
the
that's right.
casting
You know,
directors, they don't go for the known person. They go for the unknown because that person has like a secret sauce and nobody's seen them, and that's the point. They're like they want that
yep.
to could be the first time
There's
anybody
something
ever
unique.
sees
There's
that.
something. There's a stickiness to it, right? And that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And so, for me, I think yes. So I think the Kurgan, or I think his name is Charles Dance, the guy that played Tywin Lannister, would make an
Mhm.
excellent Greatoris, right? Or somebody like that. But for the most part, I have a hard time casting my own stuff because in my head, I already see what they look like, and they don't look like the actors and actresses. So it's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard for me. It's like,
Let the
yeah, I don't know
director
if I can
figure
make
it
that
out.
work. Yeah, but it's a good question, though. It's a fair
Yeah, let
question.
the director and in the art, but you might have an idea like in the graphic novel, like your artist might come to you like, does that match your vision, or do you defer to their interpretation of your vision?
Yeah, it's already happened. Like I have like the first three chapters of the graphic novel in storyboard form, and it's exactly right. Now that I see, and what they've done is almost like a police sketch artist. Like they've read the book and you tell them what you want them to look like, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's like an 85% version of what I'm looking for, and it's really good. And then you don't let them figure it out. Like at that point, just
Let
walk
them
away
kind of
from it and
like
say that's good enough. It didn't have to be, even though it wasn't exactly what's in my head, it's good enough.
yeah, you let them have some of their own artistic input. It's like in a band, like
Yeah,
I could write the bass line, or I could let the bass player write the bass line. Like I
exactly.
could like think why, but I'm not a bass player. I could write it, but the bass player is going to throw something in there that's inherent to playing the bass. I'm a keyboard player.
Yep.
I can you do bass on my keyboard, but a real bass player, because he's going to hit the frets and certain techniques that I can't do on a piano, he's going to add things to it, the color to it that I can't do it. I could try to do it, but you know what? I'm going to defer to his interpretation. If it's in the zone, like, yeah, I'm going to let him kind of feel it out.
Good enough, right? It's exactly right. Yep. Yep. I feel you on that.
But that's just really cool that you've got a lot of like things on the fire. You got the comic, maybe the graphic novel, you got the video game, and potentially, you never know if you're gonna get into one of these channels out there for like a TV. Have you thought about that, like a TV
I
miniseries?
would love to see it. I think it would be adaptable. I think it would be expensive because of the CGI effects that would need to happen as part of it. But ultimately, if you've read the novels, or if someone
Mhm.
who is in the industry would read the novels, they would see it's very
Yeah,
illustrative. It's
lend
very
itself to
graphic.
that.
It
Yeah.
would lend itself well to a really anything that's a fast paced, harrowing adventure. They would get a lot of that with magical explosions and dragons and hippogriffs and all these monsters and all these
Well,
cool
even
little
like
races. It's a lot of
even
fun.
in even an anime version. Like if you think of like you
Oh,
give
I
it to a
love it.
Japanese anime company, you
Oh,
know, and then they have them interpret it, and then their directors might like, oh wow, they might see something that you're like, wow, I didn't see it that way, but that looks cool.
yeah, I think that if we did something like, like a Castlevania
Yeah,
meets Tolkien, that would be
that'd
badass.
be pretty cool. I'm into that. Like I'm into, I watch, Bleach and Robotech and all that stuff. I was a big anime fan.
Yeah.
Cowboy Bebop is my favorite though. That's my kind of where I
Oh yeah,
got into.
Cowboy Bebop was pretty good. I'm not sure how you like the Netflix show.
No, I like the
'Cause
original
I got
cartoon.
yeah, I was gonna say I think that's the consensus on that is that it had
Watanabe,
mixed reviews,
anything
but
Watanabe does, I like all the stuff he's ever done. I'm into some of these Japanese directors like Watanabe and Tatsunoko, and like I just like a lot of the stuff. I'm a child of the '70s. There's a lot of '70s, '80s anime I'm really into, real heavy. But that's another day. But thank you again for being a guest on the podcast. We had a really good time talking about your catalog, and I'm looking forward to seeing to get wider distribution in all these other areas.
well, thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasure, and look forward to coming on again when I get into the second series in a few years.
Oh yeah, we definitely bring people back. So thank you. Yeah, open invitation.
Pleasure. All right,
Good
my
night.
friend.